Hello and welcome to my podcast on radical self-love, an Ayurvedic perspective on healing body and mind. My name is Sandra Hayes and I'm a Vedic practitioner, meaning I utilize Ayurveda, yoga and Vedic astrology as well as transformational creativity to help you become a conscious creator of your own life, health and well-being. For more information and for access to my online learning platform, The Little School of Happiness, please go to www.sandrahayes.eu. The Yoga Sutras, I think they really are an amazing text. And I feel that text is a little bit misunderstood. It's often not even very well known, and it's disregarded often as an old text that has nothing to do anymore with our life, our modern society, or our yoga practice. And in my opinion, that's not true at all. I feel that there's so much potential. It's an ancient manual for mental health. It gives us clear instructions and descriptions of how the mind works. And it comes from a society, it comes from a time and a culture where people really connected with that. It was influenced by Buddhism, and it was influenced by a lot of esoteric thought patterns that really inquired into the mind. And it's obviously, it's not a book in itself. It's not, authored by Patanjali as such, but it's a compilation of knowledge that has been there for a very, very, very long time. And it goes back to a time that is said to be a time of highest conscious potential. As we go through cycles, cycles of day and night, summer, winter. We go through bigger cycles as well, and it has to do with the amount of light that is in the atmosphere. And there is really only one aspect that separate, or maybe not only, but one major aspect that separates our modern scientific perspective from this ancient perspective, and that is consciousness. If we would take consciousness into account, then, we would really see the bigger picture, I believe. And also, when it comes to these cycles, when you take consciousness into account, then the cycles and the amount of light in the atmosphere, it's not only does it give us the seasons or influence any climate change or the weather, but it also influences the quality of our experience, the quality of our mind, of our consciousness. And obviously, there are many more cycles. There's not like, the planets are what make the cycles. If we see a rotation of the Earth, that gives us a day, cycle of the moon around the Earth, that gives us about a month. And the Earth around the sun gives us a year. But of course, there are many more cycles in the universe, in the solar system, in the galaxy. And so the ancients, they knew about those cycles, and they talked about those cycles a lot. And they talked about the influence that those cycles have on our mind. They talked about the yugas, the time frames where our consciousness has all the light that it needs to be in its full potential. And that's what they called Satya Yuga, the age of truth, where, pretty much we were very close to being enlightened, all of us. And then it goes all the way down to the darkest age, the Kali Yuga. And there's different calculations of that. There's bigger cycles and smaller cycles. And one calculation that I find particularly interesting is the calculation by Sri Yukteswar. And he wrote a book, you can look it up, it's called The Holy Science. And in that book, he presents his calculations that are much smaller calculations than some other calculations that are known. And according to these calculations, the lowest time was at around the year 500, and then it ascends again. And of course, we know around the year 500. That was the age of darkness for sure, I think, where also you can always see it by the relationship between the dualities between men and women, because, men and women are the guardians of the masculine and feminine energy. And at that time, at that particular time, the split was so big. There were, women were burned at the stake, and the feminine way was regarded as, or was very much disregarded. And also our consciousness could not really grasp a lot of things beyond the physical. And then we move on to a little bit of a higher state. And that happened, according to Sri Yukteswar's calculation, at around the year 1900. And then we enter what's called Dwapara Yuga, or also the age of energy, where we begin to grasp things beyond matter, and we start to explore energy on every level. First, of course, in the material level as forms of electricity, and that's exactly what happened. And that book was, by the way, published before the year 1900, and around that time, we had Einstein's relativity theory, and we had the invention of electricity, and we continue to explore energy, and we're still in that age. We're still in the ascending Dwapara Yuga, so that means we're still about to explore. We're still about to expand our consciousness, and this is the good news. Our consciousness is being expanded. It is getting better. But of course, it's like a snake shedding its skin. In order to change to a higher state, we have to first shed our skin, and that's painful. We have to leave certain things behind that we got attached to. We have to change our habits. We have to, change really our culture as well. And in order to change a habit that is deeply ingrained, sometimes we need to be forced to let go of something if we don't do it, if we don't do it voluntarily or in full consciousness. So, and that's the age we're in right now. And that's the age where we are literally learning and expanding. And then we keep continuing, and we keep expanding our mind and our consciousness until we get to the next Satya Yuga. And as it is the nature of all cycles, then it will go down again, and we will begin to forget, and we will begin to descend again and contract into a lower vibration, because that is what the universe does. It contracts and it expands, and we are the universe. We are not just some separate beings who happen to live in the universe, but we are the universe. We are part of it. We are part of its energy, part of its vibration. And so this is the beauty of it, is that if we see it in that way, we cannot be wrong. The universe is not wrong. There is no such thing as wrong. There's only such thing as suffering, or holding on to something, grasping on to something because we don't want to allow change, or we have a certain story of that attached to our mind. We give something value. There is nothing in the world that has that kind of value in itself. The only value, even if we think of things like gold, what value does gold have other than the value we give it? Of course, it has a certain frequency, it has a certain energy, but what does that mean for us? That's the story we create in our mind. And it's the same with anything else in our life, even an experience that we have that we conceive or perceive as difficult, and it causes us suffering. But at the same time, if we would be able to step back and see it from a bird's eye perspective, from the bigger picture, we might recognize that this experience is actually necessary for us to have in order, to let go of something, in order to emerge new again, to undergo a certain transformation. And life would be so much easier for us if we would be able to trust that those cycles, those constantly fluctuating cycles of the universe, the contracting and expanding of the universe, we would be much calmer if we are completely aware all the time that whatever cycle, whatever place we're in, this is okay. It's a part of the natural cycles. It's not, when we're in the middle of winter and there's a lot of darkness. It's only difficult if we wish it was summer. We could make that winter if we accepted it. It is winter now. It is the time of darkness. And if we were able, now this is difficult in our society, of course, but if we were able to live a life that is really natural, according to human needs and with the universe, with the cycles of the universe, then we would rest in winter. We would be withdrawn. We would go indoors. We would connect with our family. We would sleep a lot more. We would nourish ourselves. We would sit together and tell stories and feel safe and go inward and maybe meditate or do a spiritual practice. And this is what people maybe have done in the past before life got so difficult. And the only reason it is so difficult, it is because we are living a life against our natural, our human needs. And in the Yoga Sutras, there's so much in the sutras that can give us, give us direction and help and support. But this is one sutra, for example, Sutra 123, Ishvara Pranidhana, is where Patanjali is literally telling us that surrender to the universe, to these universal forces, to the intelligence of the universe, is what can give us success in the pursuit of mental health and happiness. Because if we are constantly in a state of resistance, then we cannot be happy and we cannot be in a state of mental health. And if we are not in a state of mental health, eventually we won't be in a state of physical health either. So it is important to surrender. And if that causes you to react now and think, but I don't want to surrender to something that I don't like, that's a natural reaction, of course. But we have to really sit for a moment. If there is something, I'll give you an example. If there is something in your life right now that you have a resistance to, let's say it is something to do with your work, or you're studying, you're on a course, or it could have to do with anything. It could have to do with your family, or you're usually it is about something that you think you have to do and you don't want to do it. Or you're in a relationship and you are only half committed to the relationship and you have an inner resistance. So whatever it is, just sit for a moment and imagine that resistance to whatever it is that you're experiencing. And if you could just imagine what would it be if you did not have that resistance. If you really sit like in a meditation, and close your eyes and maybe pause this podcast even and just try it out. Sit and imagine, feel the resistance that you are experiencing. Feel it fully, and then see if in your imagination, in your mind, see if you can let it go and experience, even just in your imagination, what it would feel like if that resistance wasn't there. What would happen then? And it's a really interesting experiment, because what happens often, and you might have to really take a little bit of time with it to really feel it in you. What happens often is that with the letting go of that resistance comes a lot of freedom. And with that freedom comes the freedom to decide, what do we actually really want to do with that situation? What do we really, how do we really want to proceed? So, for example, if it's a resistance, if it has to do with your work, and you have to do something, you don't want to do it, and you have a big resistance to it, and then you work with that resistance, you look at that resistance, you feel it fully, and then you let it go. If it's possible, you let it go. And then what's underneath that is the freedom to see clearly what is actually really happening. Where does that resistance come from, or where did it come from? Is the resistance something that comes from an unconscious conditioning, from maybe an old trauma that you have? And in that case, if you are really able to let it go, is it then a good thing to just continue doing your work? Is that a good thing for you? Or continue staying in the relationship that you're in? Maybe you realize actually this resistance comes from some trauma, some old trauma. And actually, if I feel I don't have that resistance, then I feel I really do love that person. I'm free to love that person and appreciate that person. Or on the other hand, does that resistance really come from your intuition, from your intuitive mind? And does that resistance tell you this is dangerous, don't proceed? And can you then, if you drop the resistance, do you have the freedom to decide, this really isn't good for me? This job, for example, I really need to leave this job. So that's an important thing to distinguish. And if we work with the resistance that we feel, it can give us a clue toward that. But either way, the resistance itself is usually what causes us suffering. And Patanjali mentions this in many ways, in different forms throughout the sutras, that to free our mind, to free ourselves, we have to drop resistance. And resistance comes from, most of the time, a resistance really does come from our unconscious mind. Most of the time we will realize that whatever resistance I feel is from something that, my own unconscious mind is programmed, but that has actually nothing to do with myself right now, in the here and now. And so surrender to the universe becomes really important, because the universe is never going to really hurt you, as in you as a soul. It may give you challenges, yes, and it may give you things or give you experiences that the ego mind does not like at all, but the soul does. And in fact, according to the Vedic teachings, there is nothing in life that can happen without the soul's permission. Nothing can happen without the soul wanting it to happen, not even death. So this is a big statement, I know, and it takes a little bit of maybe even contemplating to really grasp the meaning of it. But I really believe that it is very true, and that our suffering really comes from the gap between what the soul wants and what the ego wants. Because what the ego wants is always attached to personal stories, to personal experiences. And those experiences are karma. And karma is all that karma is an action or the result of an action. And that action can be an action that we have carried out in this life, or that we have inherited from another life or from an ancestor. So let's say if I eat a lot of sugary food, for example, or a lot of fat and a lot of, unhealthy food, and then it may be my karma to develop diabetes in this life. But it's also possible that maybe an ancestor has, or many ancestors have eaten in that way and have developed the gene and inherited it to me to be prone to diabetes. And so that is also then my karma, because it comes from a past life, from an ancestral, because we are not separate. We are never separate. Our soul is not cut off from other souls or from collective consciousness from the universe. And therefore, it is only the ego that perceives us as separate. And because of that, it is the ego that generally wants feedback that tells us we are right. Yes, we are right, because it's desperate for that kind of thing. And it always has to do with being in our comfort zone. The ego always wants to keep us in our comfort zone, but the soul wants to take us out of our comfort zone. The soul wants to give us transformation, because all that the soul wants is freedom. And if we simply trust the soul and surrender to it, surrender to the higher soul, surrender to the universe, then these experiences can come about without too much suffering, without too much resistance. Because as Patanjali tells us also, this Ishvara, as he calls it, it's sometimes translated with God, or sometimes with the universal intelligence, or with universe. But it doesn't matter what name we put on it, because all it is we surrender to the highest intelligence that there is in the universe, to the highest consciousness that there is in the universe. And this consciousness is untouched by any karma. It hasn't got an ego mind. And so we can trust it. And if we do trust it, then what happens is if we really trust it and we really surrender to the flow of life, to the flow of the universe, then we do get into a state of flow. We get into a state of harmony between us and our surroundings. And that state Patanjali calls Samadhi. And that state is a beautiful state, and he describes it in different ways, because it's, it has different stages. We are born with the ability to be in that flow state, as we can see in our children. Our children can teach us a lot about Samadhi. Our children, if they're happy children, happy and healthy children, and not, hugely traumatized, then they are naturally in a flow state. And you only have to watch a child at play. They're so engrossed in their play. They're one with their surrounding, and they're full of love, and they're full of surrender to the moment, to the very moment. And that is a state of Samadhi. It's and we can develop that state of Samadhi, and it can become a higher and higher state. And, in the lower state, as Patanjali describes it, we may still need things, that we can get engrossed into. We need things that we can use as tools. For example, the child that plays or paints or draws, it has its colors and its crayons and paper or whatever it is doing, it uses or it plays a game or whatever it is, and it uses cognition, and it uses, it imagines things, it uses imagination, and that is a state of samadhi. But we can develop that state of samadhi to higher and higher states where we don't need anything anymore. We are just permanently in a state like that. And this is what's described in the Yoga Sutras in great detail, really, and it's beautiful. And we can follow those steps. And I will talk more about those steps maybe the next time. But for now, I feel that the simplest thing that we can do is get back into a flow, into this, we don't have to take huge steps. We don't have to, if we're not in a state of flow, then there's no point in trying to take a huge step and reach, full enlightenment and the highest states of samadhi with, by meditating. And but maybe sometimes the best thing to do then is simply to start with the first smaller step and get into a state of flow like we did as a child. What causes us to be engrossed in the moment? When was the last time we were really engrossed in something and enjoyed the moment? What did we do? What causes us to be in a state of flow? And that could be anything. And even that Patanjali describes, because there are many different variations of constitutions in people. We may be of the intellectual kind, and then maybe we get engrossed into something. When we learn something, we might, love to do a course in something really interesting, or read an interesting book, or do scientific research even, or whatever it is, that causes us to be really engrossed in the moment. Or we could be a creative type and an emotional type, and we might be, in that state when we are being creative, we're doing something creative. Or we might be a physically active person, and then, when we are physically active, maybe we're kind of hiking up a mountain, or we're doing yoga postures, or we're dancing, or whatever it is. And that can bring us into a state of flow where we forget the time around us, forget, what else is there, and just be in the moment. And that is so, so important. And I feel that this is more important even than, doing a meditation practice, even though, I think I regard meditation as one of the best practices we can have. But sometimes it's more important to just take that smaller step of even finding your joy, following the path of joy, following the path of the least resistance. What actually really makes me excited? What gives me joy? And that can be the most powerful thing to do as in a spiritual practice. And it sounds very simple and it sounds very easy, but often it is the case that the simple things, the easy things, are the ones that bear the biggest truth and are the most transformative sometimes. So this is my challenge for you for this week, to follow consciously, just for 1 week, consciously follow your joy. What makes you excited? Even just a tiny little excitement, a tiny little bit of joy. What makes you excited? And even if it's something like, I just want to rest, I just want to lie around and not do anything. Well, maybe that's exactly what you need to do right now. So trust your own intuition on it, and follow your joy. This is my challenge for you for this week. And let me know how you get on with it, if you're really doing it. I hope you do, because I really love to hear from you. So that's it for today. Bye for now. You were listening to a podcast on radical self-love, an Ayurvedic perspective of body and mind, by Sandra Hayes and the Little School of Happiness. For more information and offers, go to www.sandrahayes.eu.